One day, I helped a pregnant woman who collapsed in front of me. And because of that, I was late for an important business meeting. As a result, I got fired. What do you mean helping people? The company's profits come first. You're fired. I don't regret helping her. But since that day, a series of misfortunes kept piling up. And now I'm living as a homeless man, buried under a mountain of debt. Wait, I passed a document screening. I had been rejected from many job applications due to my lack of a fixed address. However, one of the companies actually contacted me for an interview, and it's a major corporation. Tell me why you helped me that day, the beautiful CEO asked me during the interview, her first words freezing me in place. My name is Daniel Smith. I'm 30 years old. I'm a fashion designer working at an apparel company. If my designs are accepted in today's business meeting, my name as a designer will finally get known in the industry. On the way to the meeting, I kept taking deep breaths, trying to calm the nerves that wouldn't stop building up. This meeting was incredibly important, whether or not my design would be selected for a major apparel company's seasonal collection. The collection might be small since it's only for a limited season, but a company of this size would generate tons of attention. If the collection is well received, it could lead to much larger deals for the company. But because of that, Mr. Matthew Rodriguez, the managing director, has been extra intense. As I remembered Rodriguez's words just before I left the office, I tried to shake off the anxiety creeping in. Daniel, you know today's meeting is a make or break moment. If you mess up, or God forbid, show up late and make a bad impression, don't even think about coming back to the office tomorrow. Instead of feeling motivated, his warning only increased the pressure, causing me to rub my stomach slightly. If the deal fell through, I might really have to face the reality of losing my job. Even though I'm a fashion designer, I'm still a nobody in the industry, with no name recognition at all. But if today's meeting goes well, I'll finally make a name for myself that could bring me one step closer to achieving my childhood dream of launching my own brand. Clinging to that hope, I pushed myself to stay positive and headed towards the bus stop that would take me to the client's company. So the reason I came up with this design was based on your company's concept. When I arrived at the bus stop, I got in line behind the already waiting passengers and began mentally rehearsing my presentation. Some of the people standing in line were glancing at me, likely wondering why I was talking to myself, but I didn't care. Ow, my stomach. Suddenly, I heard a woman's strained voice. Turning in the direction of the sound, I saw a woman collapsed in front of a bench at the bus stop. I couldn't help but widen my eyes in shock. She looked like she was pregnant. What? I glanced around at the other people in line, most of them businessmen in suits, who were looking over at the woman but making no move to help her. They were all pretending not to notice. The bus was due to arrive soon, and everyone seemed eager to avoid getting involved in any trouble. If I missed this bus, I would definitely be late for the meeting. I had spent so much time reviewing my presentation just before leaving the house that now this was the only bus I could take to make it on time. Someone else will help her. Right. The bus is almost here, and it doesn't have to be me. I tried to convince myself and began to look away from the woman, intending to pretend I didn't see her. But then, my late mom's words echoed in my mind. Daniel, listen. If you see someone in need, be the kind of person who reaches out to help them. My mom, though not famous, was someone I deeply respected, both as a designer and as a person. Feeling ashamed of myself for even considering turning away, I shook my head, scolding myself, and ran over to the woman, calling out to her, "Excuse me, are you okay? Are you in pain? But honestly, the only knowledge I had about helping pregnant women came from what I had seen on TV. I awkwardly asked her the question, and her pained voice answered back, "No, it hurts my stomach." I looked down and saw that the ground beneath her feet was wet, like a small puddle. Her water had broken. I vaguely remembered hearing on TV that once the water breaks, the baby can be at risk of infection. "I'll call an ambulance right away. Please hold on a little longer." No nay for ambulance. My water broke, so I need to get to Heart Maternity Clinic nearby. Heart Maternity Clinic. It might be faster to take a taxi than to wait for an ambulance. I processed her fragmented words and glanced towards the road. Just then, I spotted a taxi heading our way, and I waved my arms frantically to flag it down. "I'm sorry for the trouble. It's okay. Please focus on yourself and the baby right now. We'll be there soon." "Are these all your luggage?" The taxi driver, noticing something was wrong, got out of the car and helped her into the back seat. The woman gave me a small nod in response to my question, so I grabbed her belongings and got into the front passenger seat. "I'm sorry, but could you please take us to Heart Maternity Clinic?" As soon as I got into the taxi, the bus I was supposed to catch arrived behind us, and I realized I was going to be late for the meeting. I clenched my teeth and apologized to the driver before pulling out my phone to contact the client. "Hello, this is Daniel Smith from SK Design. I had an appointment scheduled with you today, but no matter how I framed it, I knew I was going to be late." I explained the situation to the person in charge and offered a sincere apology. "I see. That sounds like a difficult situation. Are you still on your way to the hospital?" "Yes, the appointment is about to start, so I wanted to inform you as soon as possible. I deeply apologize for the inconvenience, especially after you set aside time for this meeting. No, saving a life comes first. I'll inform my superiors of the situation, but unfortunately, our schedule is quite full today, so we won't be able to reschedule the meeting for later today. Would it be possible for us to arrange a new date? Your design has been very well received by our team, and we're eager to move forward with this business discussion." Their unexpectedly understanding response left me feeling relieved as I ended the call and exhaled deeply. They said they would contact my company once they had arranged a new date for the meeting. By the time we arrived at the hospital, I explained the situation to the nurses and asked them to contact the necessary people, such as her family. Watching the woman being taken away on a stretcher, I finally exhaled in relief, knowing I had gotten her here safely. Thank goodness. I hope she has a healthy baby. All right, I need to head back to the office and report this. Even though they've postponed the meeting, I still haven't accomplished anything. I sighed, imagining my boss's scolding in my head, but I couldn't stand around wasting any more time. Dragging my heavy feet, I made my way back to the office. "You bailed on the meeting. What the hell were you thinking? I told you it was a very important meeting." As expected, when I returned and explained the situation, Mr. Rodriguez exploded with anger, berating me in front of the other employees. "I'm truly sorry. I've already explained the situation to the client, and they've agreed to reschedule." "Shut up. Do you even understand the damage you've caused? We've lost over $300K because of you." He didn't even let me finish before blaming me as if the entire deal had been canceled. Anything I said at this point would just sound like an excuse. I bowed deeply and repeated my apology to Mr. Rodriguez. "I am truly sorry. Just go home. I don't want to see your face today." Still seething, Mr. Rodriguez dismissed me, so I gathered my things and prepared to leave. However, since there was still a chance the client might reach out, I sent a follow-up email reporting the situation. and notifying them to contact us regarding the new meeting date. Then I headed home. Man, Mr. Rodriguez was furious. I can't afford to screw up the next meeting. I didn't regret helping the woman. If I had pretended not to see her and gone to the meeting, I would have been too worried about the baby and the woman to focus. And if no one had helped her, who knows what could have happened to the baby or the mother. It could have been disastrous. I had left my name and contact information at the hospital, just in case, and later that day, I received a voicemail from them. Both the baby and the mother were healthy and safe, which made me smile in relief. There'll be another chance for the meeting. But there wouldn't have been another chance for that baby or the woman's life. Yay, next time, I just need to leave earlier to avoid any what-ifs. I shifted my mindset and prepared myself for the next business opportunity. The next day, feeling slightly nervous, I headed to the office, intending to apologize to Mr. Rodriguez again. But when I arrived, my desk was gone. In the unusually empty space, I stood frozen in shock, unable to say a word. None of the other employees would meet my eyes. "What's this, Daniel? What are you doing just standing around here?" Mr. Rodriguez approached me, wearing a smirk and speaking in a mockingly sickening tone. My desk is gone." "What's going on? Your desk? Why would you have a desk here?" He crossed his arms and looked down at me with a sneer. "You wrecked that meeting and caused a company over $300K in losses. You need to take responsibility and leave." Wreck the meeting. There was a life at stake. I explained everything to the client, and they agreed to reschedule. "Why are you acting like this?" As soon as I reflexively argued back, Mr. Rodriguez's grin disappeared, and he glared at me. "Helping people? The company's profits are the top priority. You're fired." Apparently, Mr. Rodriguez had already reported the situation to the higher-ups in the company. I could understand why, given that it was such a significant business deal, but I couldn't grasp why I was being fired just because the meeting had been rescheduled. Oh, by the way, we did hear back from the client about rescheduling the meeting. But since your design was already handed over to them, I'll be taking over as the lead. So you can leave without any worries." Mr. Rodriguez smirked again as he delivered this final blow. At that moment, everything clicked for me. From the conversation I had with the client, it was clear that I had left a positive impression. The chances of the deal succeeding were probably quite high. By firing me and taking over, Mr. Rodriguez could claim all the credit for himself if the deal went through. And if the deal failed, he could just blame it on me. It was a win-win for him, with no downside. Unable to accept this, I ran to the desks where HR and the higher-ups worked. Yes, I've already been briefed by Matthew on that. It seems you skipped out on an important meeting without informing the client. This was a crucial project for the company, and your actions were deemed extremely damaging. We've decided to terminate your employment for cause. Termination for cause. But why wasn't I given a chance to explain? The client understood my situation, and the reason I couldn't attend the meeting was unavoidable. "I'm sorry, but the decision has already been finalized by the company." Neither the higher-ups nor HR would listen, and they quickly walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling dizzy. Haha, I can't believe I've been fired. I couldn't accept Mr. Rodriguez's underhanded tactics. But what shocked me more was how the company dismissed me without even hearing my side. I'd been with this company for nearly 8 years, ever since I graduated from college. Sure, Mr. Rodriguez was in a different league compared to me, a regular employee, but was it really too much to ask for them to at least hear me out? Well, no point in complaining about it now. I need to start looking for my next job. I forced myself to shake off the sinking feeling and opened a job search site. From that point on, I began applying to other companies in the fashion industry. However, every single one of them rejected me during the document screening. What's going on? Without even getting an interview, as I couldn't figure out what was causing these. I received a rejection call from a company I had applied to. Normally, companies don't disclose their selection criteria. Even though I know they won't tell me, I asked the person who called, "Excuse me, could you possibly tell me what areas I was lacking in that prevented me from being considered for a position at your company? I'm sorry, but we don't disclose the reasons behind our selection process. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors." As expected, I received the usual response. However, after the call, I realized that the person on the other end hadn't hung up properly, and I overheard a conversation between them and another employee. Is that the applicant who didn't show up for an important meeting just because he didn't feel like it? That story's all over the place now. Yay, apparently he's been applying to all sorts of fashion companies, but his real name's being spread around on social media, and he's getting flagged during background checks. I doubt he'll find a job anywhere. I immediately ended the call after hearing those words. My heart pounded loudly in my chest, filled with dread. What is going on? Trembling, I opened a browser and searched for my name. There was a guy named D. Smith who worked under me. He was the worst. He skipped an important business meeting, one that could make or break the company, just because he didn't feel like going. The damages exceeded $300K. Of course, he was fired for cause. While the name was slightly obscured, it was obvious enough for anyone familiar with the situation to figure out who it was. The company's name isn't mentioned, but this person posted the name of their employer a little while back. Anyone who looks closely can easily tell it's the company I worked for, and the post has tons of followers and shares. This is everywhere. Many companies conduct background checks on job applicants as part of their hiring process. While each company's methods differ, I'd heard that some look up candidates' names online or verify if the companies listed on their resumes actually exist. They match the information to assess whether it aligns with the applicant. And seeing this post, it wouldn't be a stretch for them to conclude that it was about me. I see. So I've been branded as a bad employee who skips important meetings without any notice. In this industry, trust is paramount, especially in business deals. With a post like that out there, it's no wonder my applications were being rejected during the initial screening. Haha, there's no way I'm getting hired now. There was only one person who could have made such a post, but I had no energy left to track them down or confront them. As the months passed, several months, I still hadn't found a new job. Rejected at the document screening stage every time, never making it to the interview. Hey, have you done nothing yet? You haven't brought in any money, haven't even worked. How long do you plan on lazing around like this? He's right. Maybe we were too soft on you. Perhaps if you didn't think you could come home, you'd have worked harder by now. After being fired, I had no choice but to leave the company housing I'd been living in. So, until I found a new job, I moved back in with my dad and his second wife, Victoria, whom he married after my mom passed away. I'm sorry, I've been applying to jobs, but I just can't seem to get to the interview stage. I don't care. It's because you're no good. A man who just lazes around without bringing in any money should get out of this house already. What? But I gave you my debit card when I moved back, didn't I? I said I'd cover the costs since I knew I'd be a burden for a while. That little bit of money is long gone by now. Victoria tossed my debit card back at me, the same one I'd handed over when I first moved back. I'd been saving steadily since I started working at my former company, and I was sure I had around $20K, but now the balance was down to a few cents. What did you spend it on in just a few months? Shut up, you ungrateful son. If you're freeloading here, you should be paying a proper amount. Was my dad always like this? The only memory I had of him was when he was quiet and spent time peacefully with my mom, though a bit reserved. Mom passed away, and I started living on my own as an adult. When Dad met Victoria and said he was remarrying, I didn't object. I understood that Dad had his own life to live, but was there something inside him that he couldn't handle? I'll never know now. Hey, why don't you just leave already? This is Anthony's and my house, not yours. I glanced back and forth between Victoria and my dad's faces, feeling as if all the strength had drained out of me. I gave up trying to speak. Nothing I say will get through to them anymore, I thought. I left the house and headed to a motel. Fortunately, I still had the debit card tied to the account where my paycheck was deposited, separate from the one I gave them. Renting an apartment would be tough right now, so I'd have to make do with staying at the motel for a while. Well, I could probably last about a month, and I still have a credit card. Once I get another job, I can start saving again. I'd prefer something in design, but if I really have to, I can take any job to get by. At that time, I still had such naive thoughts. Rejected again. While living at the motel, I continued applying to apparel companies, but I didn't realize that having no fixed address made it even harder to get hired. The wall to employment had grown even higher without me noticing. I feared I might not be able to get hired, not just in the apparel industry, but anywhere. That fear kept me from applying to other industries. I was terrified that if I got rejected in a completely different field, I wouldn't be able to recover. By the time I realized it, a season, maybe two, had passed since I left home. The cash I had on hand was almost gone. I'd maxed out my credit card and hadn't been able to make any payments, so it had been frozen. I could no longer afford the motel, and now I was spending my nights in a park. It's been almost a year since I got fired. I've racked up debt, lost my place to live, and now I'm homeless. I doubt even a grocery store would hire me at this point. For now, I was barely scraping by doing gig economy jobs, short-term, part-time work that didn't require a resume or much paperwork. But those jobs weren't available every day. I had finally decided to give up on finding work in the apparel industry and apply to other companies. Although I was scared of facing rejection and further despair, I knew I couldn't keep clinging to my past any longer. This company is hiring. That's rare. But then an ad caught my eye. It was from one of the largest apparel manufacturers in the industry, hiring for positions like designers, planners, and administrative roles. This company was famous for being run by a female CEO and for almost never hiring mid-career applicants, focusing instead on fresh graduates. The fact that they were recruiting now was enough to make me immediately access the application page. I'll make this my last attempt. If I get rejected here, I'll give up on apparel and just take any job, grocery stores, whatever, as long as they'll hire me. I'll switch to another industry. With that resolve, I waited for the selection results while sitting on a park bench. The next day, I received an email on my phone. I passed the document screening. The email informed me that I had passed the first stage, and it included details about the final interview. On the scheduled interview day, I used the wages from my part-time job to go to a public pool facility where I could shower and clean up. I put on the suit I had carefully kept in my bag to prevent it from getting dirty, and headed to the interview. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Smith. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. I look forward to speaking with you. Despite being overwhelmed with nervousness, I greeted politely in the room I was led into. I was grateful just to have made it through the document screening. There was only one interviewer. After being invited to sit, I took a seat directly across from the interviewer, who turned out to be the famous and stunning CEO herself. I had seen her featured in fashion magazines several times, but as I looked at her face, I felt a strange sense of familiarity beyond just that, as I wondered internally if it was just from those magazine appearances. The interview began, and I straightened my posture, ready for whatever questions came my way. Mr. Smith, is it? I have only one question for you. Yes, I replied, my breath catching at her piercing gaze, which was almost cold in its intensity. I braced myself for whatever she might ask. Why did you help me a year ago? I had prepared myself for questions like, what does being a designer mean to you? Or why were you unemployed for a year? Or why did you leave your last job? But her question was so unexpected that I couldn't help but let out a foolish-sounding response. I thought you looked familiar, but are you that pregnant woman from back then? I received word from the hospital that both you and the baby were safe, and I was so relieved. How's your child doing? Thank you. The baby's doing just fine. Yes, the pregnant woman I had helped a year ago was none other than Mrs. Brown, the CEO sitting before me. If you hadn't driven me to the hospital that day, both my child and I could have been in serious danger. I was told you saved both our lives, and for that, I'm deeply grateful. No, not at all. I'm just so glad you and your child are both safe. My nervousness had completely vanished by this point, and the interview started to feel more like a casual conversation. When I was discharged from the hospital, they told me your name, but a nurse accidentally deleted your phone number. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to thank you properly until now. No, really. Just being there at the right time was enough. Your gratitude is more than enough. But why did you help me? Afterward, I did a bit of research. You had a very important business meeting that day, didn't you? And yet you took me to the hospital instead. She must have found information about me through social media. With a slight frown, I answered her honestly, seeing her looking apologetic. To be honest, for a brief moment, I did think about it. I thought, someone else will probably help her. I have a meeting to get to. I'm not the only one who's going to look away. That's perfectly normal. Even if I were in your shoes, I can't say I'd have been able to act differently, she said, reassuring me instead of criticizing. I smiled at her kind words. Thank you. But in that moment, my mom's words flashed through my mind. She always said, be the kind of person who's big enough to help those in need. She passed away some time ago, but I've always admired her, both as a designer and as a mother. She sounds like a wonderful mother. She really was. I want to live in a way that would make her proud. That's why I helped you. Sure, a lot of things happened afterward, but I've never once regretted helping you that day. I said this with confidence, and after a brief pause, the CEO exhaled softly and smiled. I see, that's your answer. Understood. Daniel, I'm offering you a position at our company. I saw in your resume that you worked as a designer in your previous job. Do you have a preference for your department here? Wait, you're hiring me, but I don't even have a fixed address right now. And I hate to admit it, but I have a pretty bad reputation on social media too. We have company housing available, so you can move in as early as today. And as for the social media stuff, I've seen those posts. It's terrible misinformation. I remember hearing you make a very polite call from the taxi. I couldn't focus on much at the time because of the labor pains, but I heard that much. Surprised by the word hired, I reflexively asked for confirmation, but the CEO responded casually, as if it was nothing. Every time I failed a job screening in the past, it felt like my actions were being invalidated. But now, having finally been recognized, I felt tears welling up. Oh, and you've got some debt, don't you? The company can give you a loan. You can pay it off little by little from your salary each month. The sudden shift from my downward spiral of a life was hard to grasp. In a daze, I completed the hiring paperwork, requested to be assigned as a designer, and moved into the company's housing that same day. So now, in a new environment, I was set to start working as a designer. But there was one thing I was still worried about. Those rumors about me circulating on social media. Hey, you're the new guy. Oh yeah, Daniel, right. Yes. Nice to meet you. As I sat at my new desk in the department, unpacking my belongings, a coworker suddenly addressed me, and I felt a cold sweat break out. I unconsciously held my breath, wondering what they might say. You're the one who helped the CEO last year, aren't you? Everyone in the company knows about it. Huh? What do you mean? The coworker's words were the complete opposite of what I had expected. I couldn't help but ask. When you applied, the CEO told us all about it. She was saying the guy who helped me that day might be joining us. We've all been looking forward to meeting the person who saved both her and her child. There are some nasty rumors floating around, but don't worry about that. From now on, we're coworkers, so let's get along. I had feared that, given the bad reputation I had developed in this industry, even if the CEO had hired me, I would be ostracized by the other employees. But not only the coworker who spoke to me, but others as well seemed to view me as the CEO's family's savior, and I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in a long time. As I started fresh, working under the CEO as a designer, one day she approached me with a new task: designing maternity wear. Maternity wear, huh? Yes. It's like a small competition within the company, so I'd love for you to participate. By the way, if your design wins, it'll be released as a featured product, so keep that in mind. Wait, doesn't that add more pressure than you're letting on? I had never designed maternity wear before. I blurted out my concerns about the mounting pressure, but at the same time, I felt a strange curiosity building. When I was pregnant, comfort was my top priority, but I still wanted to wear cute and stylish clothes. But of course, nothing that was too tight around the belly. I see. So it has to prioritize comfort while also being fashionable. Taking her words to heart, I began to visualize the design in my mind. I was so focused that I didn't even notice the smile spreading across her face as she watched me. The event she was talking about was an internal company collection focused on a specific theme, and this time, the theme was maternity wear. Not only those in design departments, but anyone in the company could participate, and I decided to submit my design for the collection. I researched the challenges pregnant women face and tried to come up with a design that balanced both style and comfort. After much trial and error, I completed one design and made a sample. The fabric I chose was soft and breathable, making it something I could feel confident about. Then came the day of the collection, and as I walked into the venue, my jaw dropped at the scale of the event. I thought they said this was a small-scale collection, but there are people here who seem like they're scouting for other companies. And the judges are from outside. This is way bigger than I expected. The venue was spacious, showcasing numerous works by the employees. they would choose the best designs from this collection. Since the event wasn't restricted to company insiders, designers from other firms, and people from the fashion industry had come to observe. I wandered around the venue, looking at other people's work, hoping to incorporate perspectives I lacked. As I thought, comfort is a top priority in maternity wear. But pregnant women want to be fashionable too. How can I create something that's gentle on the belly, yet uplifting in style? While contemplating possible improvements to my own design, I suddenly heard a familiar voice behind me. Daniel Smith. What are you doing here, Mr. Rodriguez? I work here now. I turned around to see my former boss. Memories flooded back, and I couldn't help but frown. You work here? Impossible. There's no way someone like you could survive in this industry. After all the criticism I gave you, who in their right mind would hire you? Oh, I hired him. Is there a problem with that? Suddenly, the CEO, Mrs. Brown, who had also been walking around the venue, stepped into the conversation. Well, Mrs. Brown, it's been a while, but this man you hired, he's completely unreliable. He broke off a crucial deal on his own selfish terms, costing the company a fortune. I had to clean up his mess, but the designs he left behind were so subpar that the deal ultimately fell through. You have no idea how much trouble he caused me. My former boss had shifted to an overly polite demeanor upon the CEO's arrival. He started exaggerating the stories of my supposed failures, waving his hands dramatically as he slandered me. Mrs. Brown listened coolly, casting a cold gaze at Mr. Rodriguez. Oh, is that so? You see, our company also has dealings with the same client Daniel was in at that time. I happened to have a conversation with them recently, and they said they were extremely frustrated with the replacement after Daniel left. The new person failed to understand the vision and kept pushing irrelevant designs. They mentioned how much they missed the thoughtful, comfortable designs that had been proposed before. What? That's impossible. Oh, and you just said after all the criticism I gave you, didn't you? It almost sounds like you're admitting to spreading negative rumors about Daniel yourself. Care to explain? I blinked in surprise as the CEO pointed out facts I hadn't known. She then gestured toward a corner of the venue. And when I looked over, I saw the representative from the company I was supposed to meet for that fateful deal. He smiled at me knowingly, understanding the situation. I smiled back, struggling to contain the joy welling up inside me. I don't know what you're implying, Mrs. Brown, but hiring someone like him is a mistake you'll soon regret. Is that so? Well, the results are about to be announced. Right after she spoke, an announcement came over the speakers, informing us that the judges were ready to reveal the winner of the competition. Everyone's attention shifted to the stage. The award for Best Design goes to Mr. Daniel Smith from the Design Consulting Department. Mr. Smith's design captured the playful spirit and stylishness that many pregnant women give up on, while utilizing a light, comfortable material. His work received high praise for balancing comfort and aesthetic appeal. This design will be featured as the centerpiece of our upcoming maternity wear collection. Please look forward to it. There you have it. It looks like the one who should be regretting their actions is you, for tarnishing the name of such a talented individual out of petty jealousy. This is just luck. Don't think winning in a small collection like this means you can succeed in the industry, Daniel. As the host explained my design, and the judges showered it with praise, Mr. Rodriguez, who had been glaring at me with contempt, muttered bitterly under his breath. With a resentful grinding of his teeth, he stormed out of the venue. Daniel, did you hear? There's a rumor going around that someone at your old company was spreading bad things about you. Apparently, they were fired in the end. What? Really? A few days after the collection, one of my colleagues told me the news, causing me to stop working on my design in surprise. I had made it a point not to search my name online after the trauma of my past rumors, so I hadn't heard anything about what had happened to Mr. Rodriguez. Yay, people saw him arguing with the CEO at the event. Someone posted about it on social media, and it spread like wildfire. Turns out he was the one behind your bad reputation, and he's been getting a lot of backlash for it. His company was flooded with complaints, and he ended up being fired because they couldn't function anymore. My reputation, which had been tarnished, changed drastically after winning the top prize at the recent collection event. Even during business meetings with clients, the suspicious glances I once received had disappeared. The same person who tried to bring me down on social media had now been undone by it. It was a classic case of you brought this on yourself. I hope they take time to reflect and learn from this experience. I wouldn't feel guilty if they had to endure even a fraction of the hardships I went through. That said, the reason I can think about this so detachedly now is because I've found a place where I belong, this company. Well, I never thought I'd be able to work as a designer again like this, I murmured to myself after parting ways with the colleague who had shared the rumor. Mom's words had stayed with me, and the hand I extended to others had left its mark on their hearts. That's why I'm here today. When I left my previous company, some people's attitudes toward me changed drastically. Coworkers I once considered friends avoided eye contact, and those I had thought of as family severed ties the moment the money ran out. I haven't heard from them since, but there are also people who remembered the hand I extended and didn't forget me. Knowing that, I can look back on the past year and realize it was a necessary time in my life. Thank you, Mom. I think I can keep going strong from here. A few years later, with support from the CEO and my growing career as a designer, I would go on to launch my own brand, fulfilling the dream Mom and I once had together. But that's a story for another time.
Before moving to this neighborhood, I thought it was just a regular residential area. But it turns out, this place is really active with community events. As a result, interactions with neighbors have become frequent, and now almost everyone is familiar with each other to the point where an unknown person loitering around raises suspicions. Plus, everyone's really conscious about security. Every 6 months, there's a safety meeting where adults and kids from around the area participate, attending lectures on prevention and presenting research findings. The first time I attended, I was surprised by how informative it was, but everything I learned has been useful in daily life. That's why I'm very careful with key management and always check the doors with my son before we leave the house. But sometimes, when I come back home, I feel like the atmosphere or the vibe is different, as if something's off. It's not like there's a lingering scent, but just a feeling of discomfort. My son Keith has also mentioned in secret that he feels like someone has been in his room. The only one in our family who seems completely oblivious to these vibes is my husband Tanner. Really? I don't get that vibe at all, he says with a dismissive laugh, making me regret even mentioning it. Tanner works in the General Affairs Department of a trading company and has started working from home 3 days a week, according to the company's policy. I work at a shop, so I have to go to work every day. Keith is also out most of the time with school, clubs, and tutoring. So, I thought if Tanner doesn't feel anything, then it must be nothing, but then I had a realization that made me completely distrust his words. Because of the strong community ties here, neighborly interactions are quite deep. I've gotten to the point where I occasionally have tea with my neighbor Virginia, inviting each other over to our houses. One day, after coming back from work, she caught me and invited me to her house with a serious look on her face. This was unusual, so I was a bit curious but went over. "Tanner is working from home these days, right?" she asked seriously. When I confirmed, Virginia awkwardly started. "I was planning to distribute some flyers to your house today. But I was in the middle of hanging laundry and couldn't step away, so I asked my son to do it," Virginia said. Her son, a college student, happened to be home for spring break. "He's always cooped up at home playing video games, so I thought it'd be good for him to get out." I had to push him a bit, but he reluctantly agreed to deliver the flyers and also grab some toilet paper from the supermarket on the way. I watched him go to your house and ring the doorbell, just observing from the balcony while I hung the laundry. The rule I mentioned is about handing out flyers directly whenever possible, which is unique to our area. It seems that increasing face-to-face interactions with neighbors helps in preventing crime. "After my son rang your doorbell a couple of times, your husband appeared to come out in a bit of a hurry. But then, someone else sneaked out of the back door of your house." "What?" I exclaimed loudly, surprised. "I was at work, and Keith was at school and then tutoring. He shouldn't have been home." Could it have been one of Tanner's co-workers? But they wouldn't need to sneak out of the house. As I urged her to continue with a sense of foreboding, Virginia said with a sympathetic look, "That was Lucy. Her perm and frizzy hair are unmistakable. She probably thought Abigail or Keith was coming back and hurried out the back. She's had similar issues before, so I was a bit worried. I didn't want to meddle, but I thought you should know." While I was grateful to Virginia, the mention of similar issues caught my attention. Virginia isn't the type to spread rumors or baseless stories. If she says it was a problem, there must have been something. Upon probing further, she hesitantly shared, "There was a food truck event in the neighborhood once. Lucy got too close to a man she was working with there. Even after the event, they were seen together, and the man's wife caught them. It's unclear, but it turned into a big mess involving both families. In the end, the man moved away, and the issue remained unresolved, but many believe Lucy was the instigator. Indeed, Lucy, despite being married, tends to get too close. Especially to men, which hasn't made her popular among the women." Thinking back, I remember Tanner chatting with Lucy at a New Year's party we attended right after moving here. Could it have been since then? Feeling pale, I thanked Virginia and headed home quickly. Entering the house, I couldn't shake off that feeling again. Perhaps it was because of what Virginia told me, but I felt the presence of someone else strongly. I decided to confront Tanner directly. Beating around the bush has never been my style. "Hey, did you have someone over today? The sofa cushions seem a bit off," I asked, going on a hunch, but Tanner visibly panicked. "So, Lucy was here?" "No, no one's been here. I was just working in the living room, changed the sofa around a bit for a change of scenery." I'm usually lenient with children's lies. They're still growing and learning, and getting caught in a lie is part of becoming an adult. But I have no tolerance for lies from adults. Especially lies from my husband. Tanner knows about this, yet he tries to hide it. "Really? You really didn't let anyone in the house?" Thinking this was my last chance, I asked him. But Tanner retorted, "Of course I didn't. Abigail, you keep saying you feel someone's presence, but maybe you're just being overly sensitive because of the high crime awareness in our area?" At that moment, I was convinced Tanner was having an affair. After that, I started to watch his actions more carefully than ever. When I looked at his behavior with that in mind, it all seemed very suspicious. I found hair that probably belonged to Lucy in Tanner's office, and worse, there were signs someone had been in our bedroom. I couldn't understand how he could leave messages exchanged with her so carelessly while he was showering. The messages they sent each other, talking about how exhilarating and exciting it was to meet, only filled me with contempt. But just hair and screenshots of messages felt like weak evidence. From what I could see in their messages, Tanner and Lucy hadn't made any explicit plans to meet, which might allow them to claim they were just friends. It seems they were communicating within a range that could barely be considered platonic. It seemed I had no choice but to catch them in the act. Wandering around the house with these worries, even Keith must have thought I was acting strange. One day, Keith whispered to me, "Hey Mom, you've been looking for something a lot lately." "I know." I panicked, thinking he had realized I was searching for evidence of Tanner's affair, but Keith's thoughts were purely childlike. "Our house must have a ghost. That's what you're looking for, right? I'll help you catch it for Mom." I remembered once mistakenly asking about ghosts online, thinking it was a paranormal issue. Perhaps it's a case of like mother, like son? Ignoring my reassurances that it was nothing, Keith began excitedly explaining. "I saw how to catch ghosts in an anime. I'll set traps in the room, and if a ghost gets caught, I'll get rid of it for you, so don't worry, Mom." The trap he set up was so simple it could hardly be called a trap, but it was harmless enough that even if Keith got caught in it himself, he wouldn't be injured. I gave him the okay and then forgot about it, never imagining that such a trap would actually come in handy. The day that would prove to be fateful was the day of our biannual neighborhood safety meeting. Keith and I were attending, of course, but Tanner, finding it a hassle, chose to stay home. I had anticipated this and suspected that Lucy would sneak in to meet him, so I set up webcams at the back door and in the living room. But I had anticipated this. Thinking that Tanner's affair partner, Lucy, would sneak in, I set up webcams at the back door and the living room. Catching Lucy on camera would serve as decisive evidence for a divorce. With this in mind, I took Keith with me to the community center. This year's safety meeting was quite exciting, having invited a crime prevention consultant as the speaker. They taught us how to identify homes targeted by burglars and the methods of door-to-door scammers, using real incidents as examples, which kept even the children engaged. "Mom, I forgot something for the presentation. Can I go back and get it?" Keith asked. He was supposed to present at the children's section of the safety meeting, acting out what to do when approached by a stranger, with little Keith playing the victim. He seems to have forgotten the safety buzzer at home. Luckily, our home was only a 2 to 3 minute walk from the community center, a path he often took to school, so I let him go alone. But in less than 5 minutes, Keith returned, out of breath and excited. "Mom, there's a stranger on the second floor of our house. Their hair looked like it exploded. That must be the ghost in our house." Since the speaker was on a break, Keith's voice echoed throughout the venue. The exploded hair must be referring to Lucy's permed hair. I couldn't say, "It's not a ghost," but probably Dad's affair partner, leaving me puzzled on how to respond. As Keith pulled on my hand, trying to take me home, the crime prevention consultant said something surprising. "If it's a ghost, I'll drive it out. Let's go check it out together." The people around us lit up with excitement. They seemed thrilled at the opportunity to confront a suspicious person. Dividing into 2 groups, one for the front door and one for the back, they even started assigning members for the breach, leaving me to leave it up to fate. The scene from above my house would have looked like something out of a suspense drama. On the consultant's signal, neighbors burst in from the front and back. The loud footsteps must have startled Tanner. "What's going on?" he exclaimed, running down from the second floor. Today, instead of lounging on the living room sofa, he seemed to have been enjoying his affair upstairs, in the bedroom or office. The crime prevention consultant explained on behalf of me, who was coldly watching Tanner with his shirt hanging out of his pants. Keith told us there was someone unknown in the house. We thought it was nothing, just a child's word, but we decided to check just in case. While he spoke, his gaze shifted around without letting his guard down, truly a professional demeanor. He probably noticed his suspicious behavior as well. But Tanner, desperate not to get caught, blustered. "That's ridiculous. I've been alone at home the whole time. So, no one has been in this house." He wanted to claim that no one had come or gone, but a sudden scream interrupted him. "Ah! What is this?" After a loud crash and a scream from upstairs, everyone's attention shifted. "Hey, don't go up there!" Tanner tried to stop us, but ignoring him, I ran up the stairs. Swept up in the moment, the crime prevention consultant and others followed. What I saw upstairs was Lucy, covered in green slime from head to toe, continuing to scream. "Ah, get this off me, quick!" Seeing the door to the children's room open, I finally understood what had happened. Lucy must have thought it was bad to stay in the bedroom or office upon seeing the crowd arrive and decided to hide in the nearest children's room. Then, she must have fallen right into the trap Keith had set. The loud noise was probably when she tripped over the string, but how her head ended up covered in slime was beyond me. I didn't remember seeing a slime trap when I checked before. Whispering to Keith, who approached, he proudly explained he had improved the trap. "Friends said ghosts don't have feet. So I thought if it doesn't have feet, it won't trip on the string in front of the door. Just in case, I added a trap where slime from a capsule toy container would fall as soon as the door opened." When I saw it before, there was just a thin string across the front of the door. Children think of interesting things, but using slime was unexpected. To Lucy, hysterically trying to peel the slime off her hair, I coldly said, "So, can you explain why you is here? I'm pretty sure we didn't give you a key to our house." Lucy turned pale and fell silent. I turned to Tanner, surrounded by neighbors, and spoke. "You said earlier that you were the only one here, but that wasn't true, was it? Can you explain why Lucy was on the second floor?" Despite having so many witnesses, Tanner was stubborn. "Well, that's because I had something to ask Lucy about the neighborhood. I swear, there were no ulterior motives. Believe me, Abigail!" Tanner exclaimed. I was incredulous. "Since we moved here, have you ever participated in a community event even once? If you wanted to know something about our neighbors, you should have actively participated in events like today's safety meeting. How can anyone believe someone who doesn't even do that?" The neighbors around us nodded in agreement, as if it made perfect sense. Tanner shrank under their cold stares. And then one man stepped forward. It was Lucy's husband, Scott. "Lucy, you did it again! I can't stand it anymore. We're getting a divorce." Lucy burst into tears and tried to cling to Scott, covered in slime. "No, please forgive me. It was just a little thrill." Scott shook off her hand. "Don't touch me with those dirty hands. Now that it's come to this, I'll also be taking back the compensation money I fronted for our previous divorce proceedings." The incident with the food truck Virginia mentioned was indeed about an affair. Scott had defended Lucy once and paid the compensation money, but now felt betrayed. Inspired by Scott, I decided not to show any more leniency towards Tanner. "Tanner, you've left all the community interactions to me and used working from home as a cover for your affairs. I'm getting a divorce, so prepare yourself." Tanner looked utterly shocked. "Abigail, I'm sorry. I was tempted by the devil's whisper. I won't do it again. Please forgive me." No matter what was said, my heart wouldn't budge. Tanner must have known he was the reason Keith and I felt uneasy about the presence of someone else in our home. Yet, he chose to continue seeing his affair partner, Lucy, over addressing our fears. How could I keep such a person as Keith's dad? I kicked him out of the house that very day. I couldn't bear to live in this house where Tanner enjoyed his affair, so I planned to sell it. However, I intend to use the entire sale amount as compensation for the divorce proceedings and maybe buy an apartment in this neighborhood with that money. Despite the incident with Tanner's affair, this area has excellent crime prevention, making it a wonderful place to live. It should be safe for Keith and me to live here alone. Adding up the compensation money I plan to claim from Lucy, I should be able to purchase a more secure home than the current one. I'm considering asking that crime prevention consultant for advice on how to choose a safe apartment. I'm a 30-year-old housewife. My husband, Thomas, is a 32-year-old office worker, and we have 2 children, our 5-year-old daughter, Karen, and our 2-year-old son, John. Becoming a mother to Karen was the reason I became a housewife, though I originally worked at the same company as Thomas. We had what you might call an office romance. Although Thomas and I were in different departments, we often visited each other's desks, and after he initiated contact, we started dating when I was 23. At first, we kept our relationship a secret, but as people began to notice, we received a lot of support and eventually got married. Soon after our marriage, I got pregnant with Karen and gave birth the following year. I had planned to return to work after maternity leave, but Thomas said, "I want Megan to take care of the home, and I want Karen to spend a lot of time with her mom. I'll work hard and earn for us." Encouraged by this, I decided to quit my job and stay at home. Fortunately, Thomas earned a decent income, and I agreed to his wish. As a housewife, I gave birth to our second child, John, 2 years ago, and our family of 4 has been living together since. With just Karen, it was manageable, but having 2 children made me worry about saving for the future on just Thomas's salary. After discussing it with Thomas, we decided it was time for me to go back to work. However, just as I had finally found a job, Thomas dropped a bombshell. He was being sent on a solo assignment. "I have to go to the Seattle branch for at least a year, maybe 3, starting in 2 months. "What? Seattle? But I've just found a job. This is really inconvenient." "Can't be helped. It's already decided." "What about the kids' daycare and their friends?" "Why are you bringing up their friends?" "Because moving to Seattle means saying goodbye to them." "Ah, sorry, that came out wrong. I'll be going to Seattle alone. I've told my mom and she's okay with it because Megan will be there for the kids. It'll be fine." "You're going alone? But your company could have refused, right? Why didn't you discuss this with me? I wanted you to be there for the kids as their dad." "Quit nagging. It's decided. The kids will be happy with Megan, their mom, by their side. And about your job, it's just a part-time job. The pay is barely pocket money. Just quit it. After this assignment, I'll be up for promotion." "What about the kids? They're still so young to be away from their dad." "Honestly, taking care of the kids has been a hassle. They're not even that attached to me since I'm always at work. They'll be fine without me." This was Thomas's rationale. But back at the company where I used to work, even though they would ask about relocating to a distant location, married employees could refuse without it affecting their evaluation. So, I believe Thomas must have been approached about this a few months ago, agreed to it, and then received his official orders, all without consulting me. Finding out this way, without any discussion on such an important matter, really upset me. And it was the first time I learned he thought taking care of the kids was a hassle. Sure, he'd avoid going out on his days off, claiming he was tired from work, but hearing him say it outright really hurt. The only saving grace was that the kids were asleep during this conversation and didn't hear any of Thomas's words. By the way, I live in Atlanta, so Seattle is a plane ride away. After discussing it with Thomas, we made several promises: to video call once a week, always return messages, keep each other updated regularly, and for him to spend time with the kids when he's back. For now, despite my anxieties, I've decided to send him off with a good spirit since complaining won't change anything. In the first few months after Thomas left for his solo assignment, he kept his promise to video call, sent presents for the kids' birthdays, and always came back for long vacations, fulfilling his role as a dad during Christmas and Thanksgiving within his limited time. However, as time passed, he started using his busy schedule as an excuse to reduce the frequency of our video calls and began to ignore my messages, essentially breaking most of our agreements. With support from both our parents, I started working, and last year, I began working as a full-time employee. About a year and a half after Thomas started his solo assignment, I received a message from my former coworker, Savannah.
Megan, did you and Thomas split up?
No. We're not split up. He's on a solo assignment, so communication has been a bit scarce.
Thomas might be cheating on you at his assignment location.
What? Why would you suddenly say that? To my surprise, my former coworker sent me a screenshot of a social media post. It showed Thomas with a woman in her mid-20s, both smiling and showing off rings on their ring fingers, with the caption "Getting married soon." Who is this? Wait, getting married as in marrying Thomas?
I'm not sure, but a colleague of mine, Steven, who went to the Seattle branch, said he saw Thomas walking closely with a woman when he tried to invite him for drinks after work.
Savannah continued to share what she learned. Steven, upon spotting Thomas with the woman, called out to him without thinking, but the woman said, "Thomas has always been so helpful," making Steven realize something was off for the first time. Thomas seemed pale, but the woman, unfazed, even invited Steven to join them for a meal. Apparently, both Thomas and Steven initially declined, but a colleague from the Seattle branch of Thomas's office was eager to join.
I'm going to join the dinner too.
He seemed enthusiastic about it, and that led to a strange dinner where they ended up exchanging social media contacts with the woman Thomas was cheating with. Of course, Thomas made Steven swear to secrecy, and Steven agreed.
I'm dating Steven. That's why I was using his phone when I got a social media update notification. It was annoying on the screen, so I was going to delete it but ended up tapping on it,
Savannah said with a bitter expression. When I confronted Steven about it, he confessed everything. Since Thomas is his senior, he felt he couldn't speak up after being told to keep quiet. I'm really sorry, Savannah said that and bowed her head to me.
No, thank you for telling me.
After this conversation, I immediately consulted my parents about it. I wanted to hire a detective, but, having just started working, I didn't have the disposable income. My parents were furious after hearing my story and seeing the photo, and they offered to cover the investigation costs. It didn't cost much, because Thomas was living with his affair partner, Kelly. Quickly gathering evidence, I thought about filing for divorce right away, but being a housewife with no stable income at the time, and realizing the tough situation it would put me and the kids in, I spent the next 6 months job hunting until I secured a position. After working hard for a year to stabilize my life, just when I was about to propose divorce to Thomas, my assignment is over, and I'll be back next week, he messaged me out of the blue. Yeah, you could have told me sooner. I swallowed those words and asked Thomas about his return schedule, deciding to welcome him back. On the day Thomas was supposed to return, I couldn't make it because of work, and the kids were at my parents' house, so Thomas was supposed to come back to an empty house. But what awaited him was actually my daughter Karen, now in the 2nd grade, 5-year-old John, and my mother, Serena. I'm home. Hey. Megan? No one's here to welcome me back?
Thomas, weren't you supposed to come back later?
Huh? Serena? Why are you here? Peeking out from behind her surprised grandma was Karen. Oh, Karen. You've gotten so big. Thomas apparently spread his arms to hug her, but Karen ignored him and said,
Grandma, let's go back to your house quickly.
Karen? It's Dad embarrassed, maybe? Oh, there's John too. Come here.
No, Grandma, who is this man?
Dad, what are you talking about?
Mom and Grandma said not to follow strangers.
Is it okay? Dad got John's favorite chocolate.
Mom said chocolate from scary people doesn't taste good, so I shouldn't take it.
Actually, Thomas hadn't been home for 1.5 years by then, so honestly, for John, Thomas was just someone he had seen a few times over video calls. While Thomas was confused by the children's reactions, I happened to come home and walked into this awkward situation. Huh? Thomas, weren't you supposed to come back later? And why are the kids here? I'm so sorry, Megan. John really wanted his toy that he left at home. I heard Thomas would be back later, so I thought it would be okay.
What's with that tone? It's like you're saying it's my fault for coming back early. I've been on this solo assignment for 3 years, feeling lonely all for the sake of my family.
Don't raise your voice in front of the kids.
Megan, what kind of parenting have you done for the kids to become so cheeky? Karen is ignoring me, and John is treating me like some unknown old man.
It's obvious, isn't it? Old man, what do you want now? It was Karen who spoke up, blaming Thomas.
After leaving us behind, you didn't keep your promises to Mom, and you didn't want to take care of us, right? That's why you left, isn't it? What are you talking about? I heard you talking to Mom before you disappeared from home. You said the kids should just be looked after by Mom. Old man, you said taking care of us was a hassle. Karen, you heard that. I woke up to go to the bathroom that day. I didn't understand what the conversation was about then, but I could tell Mom's voice was sad. Now that I'm in elementary school and understand what hassle means, I get what old man was saying.
Karen said this, looking like she was about to cry.
Karen, Dad didn't mean it like that. Then why did you break your promises to Mom? Why didn't you come home? It's because taking care of us was a hassle, right? Hey, Megan! You must have instilled some weird ideas in them, right? Don't be mean to Mom and Karen.
John interrupted Thomas's loud accusations against me after hearing Karen's story. He had let go of Mom's hand and charged at Thomas with all his might, but he tripped over Thomas's carry-on case and fell forward on his way. John's head collided with Thomas's chin as he was squatting down, causing Thomas to fall back and hurt his back, and John started crying from the pain of the collision. Seeing this, Karen, her face red with anger, yelled,
Apologize to Mom now. John is crying because he's hurt. Get out of the way.
And kicked the carry-on case as hard as she could. The case, pushed with all of Karen's might, crashed into Thomas's groin and then fell onto his lower abdomen. Thomas writhed in pain, ending up in a collapsed position.
It doesn't seem like we can have a proper conversation today, but let me make it clear that we don't need you in our family anymore.
Feeling somewhat satisfied with Thomas's plight, yet not wanting to leave the kids with him, I went back to my parents' house with Mom and the kids. The next day, I contacted Thomas to arrange a meeting with him, my parents, and his parents to discuss what comes next.
I know about your affair and that you were living with your mistress at your assignment. I can't live with someone like that, and the kids think their dad is gone. So, please, let's get a divorce. Wait a minute! What affair? Did you hear something from Steven? He's just jealous and has been feeding you lies about me. What lies? You're getting married to Kelly, right? And I have proof that you two were living together.
I said this, laying out the printed screenshots of Kelly's social media and evidence from the detective on the table.
Thomas, this is not what I heard. Could it all be Megan's misunderstanding? I don't know what story Thomas has told you, but the truth is he was living with a woman named Kelly during his assignment. Moreover, she's planning to sue him for marriage fraud, claiming they were engaged to be married. What? It was just a fling. Megan is the one I truly love.
And the kids?
The kids too. Saying it like an afterthought doesn't make you fit to be their dad.
I said this, glaring at Thomas. In the end, Thomas, facing the fury of my father-in-law, Kendrick, signed the divorce papers then and there, agreeing to the alimony and child support claims, finalizing our divorce. Thomas had spent a significant amount of money on his life with Kelly, claiming to me his salary had decreased, which was also revealed to be a lie, and I ended up receiving all assets without division. Kelly also sued him for compensation for breaking off their engagement and additionally for a settlement over marriage fraud, leading Thomas into debt. It seems Steven had contacted Kelly through social media. While it's unclear if what Thomas did to Kelly qualifies as marriage fraud, Kendrick's scolding led him to settle with her as well. Moreover, Kelly came all the way from Seattle to our home in Atlanta, stormed into the company, and exposed Thomas's double life. As a result, Thomas, who was supposed to return and get promoted, ended up being demoted to a remote branch. As for me, after staying at my parents' house for a while, I started dating a man I had a connection with. Actually, while Thomas was on his solo assignment, an old childhood friend, William, had been affectionately looking after my children. Due to an illness he suffered as a child, William was infertile and had given up on the idea of marriage and having children of his own, which made him all the more affectionate towards my kids. When my divorce was finalized, William confessed, "I want to watch Megan's children grow up. More than anything, I want to be by Megan's side." At first, I hesitated because I hadn't sorted out my feelings, but after a few months since divorcing Thomas, seeing how much the kids adored William and how much he had supported me emotionally, I accepted his feelings since I had grown fond of him as well. I can't think about remarriage yet, but for the happiness of my children, I'm willing to do whatever I can.
Pay up the protection money, boss's orders.
It was the grand opening day of my father's long-awaited ramen shop. A man claiming to be a gangster who controlled this entire area showed up at the store on that very first day. He demanded money, and my furious father, Charles, decided to call in a certain someone.
That brat, how dare he? Go get the boss.
My father ordered, and I immediately made the call. 5 minutes later, the gang boss arrived, and I'm Nancy, 20 years old. I'm currently a college student, helping my mother prepare for the opening of my father's ramen shop. My mother has always been physically weak, so my father and I did most of the preparations. I was the one who inspired my father to open a ramen shop. My father has loved ramen since he was a child, and he says he was shocked the first time he tried it. He decided that when he grew up, he would open his own ramen shop to share that excitement with others. However, as an adult, my father gave up on that dream for a while to support us and joined a company with a stable income. It was a great workplace, and he enjoyed his job, but my father couldn't let go of his dream. When I declared that I had received a scholarship and was going to culinary school, my father shared his long-held dream of having his own ramen shop. That was the first time I learned about my father's passionate feelings. And I wanted to support him. By that time, my mother hardly needed any hospital expenses and was working part-time little by little, so I talked to her and decided to support my father. My father was hesitant, but encouraged by us, he made up his mind to open his long-cherished ramen shop. He was so happy preparing for the opening. But to think that such a thing would happen right after the opening. And I was about to witness a new reality. Opening day. My father's ramen shop is about a 10-minute walk from our house. It happened to be on land owned by an acquaintance, and my father said he was allowed to use it. My father was in high spirits from the morning and took care of most of the many preparations. My mother and I really enjoyed watching him like that. Moreover, although my father had been an employee for a long time, his ramen-making skills were first class. Apparently, he had been secretly researching ramen as a hobby, visiting various shops and eating ramen even on weekdays. The first time I tasted my father's ramen, I was amazed at how delicious it was. I grew to love my father's ramen very much. Before we knew it, it was time for the store to open. My father and I waited nervously, wondering what kind of people would come. Of course, for this day, I had advertised my father's store on social media and by distributing flyers. I also told my school friends and people at school.
There's a discount for the first 3 days, so please come.
And then we welcomed our first customers. My father's store has a small and cozy atmosphere, with a maximum capacity of 20 people, including the counter seats. Despite that, even more people visited the store, and everyone waited with a smile for a seat to become available while sniffing the delicious aroma of ramen. My father and I were so happy, and we served the customers with joy. However, an incident occurred that seemed to disrupt our happy feelings. It was that evening. The time when the flow of customers had calmed down. 2 men with bad attitude came to the store. My father and I thought they were the last customers and were serving them with a friendly demeanor. At first, they seemed like very nice people. But when we said we were closing the store for the day, their attitude suddenly changed.
We're customers. We're still eating, aren't we? Are you telling us to leave already?
They said in an intimidating tone, holding out their empty beer mugs. Looking at the table, they had already finished eating, and the last order had been taken, so we weren't saying anything unreasonable. I'm sorry, but please leave as it's closing time now. My father pleaded humbly, but the customers didn't stop their rough behavior. They smashed beer glasses and knocked over the bowls lined up on the table.
Shut up! I'm a customer. The customer is always right.
Drunk or not, the customer who introduced himself as Anthony stuck to his own claims. My father tried to persuade them several times with a troubled look, but the customers still wouldn't get up from their seats.
I'm not paying for a place like this.
After complaining endlessly, the customer finally threw down the bill, saying that. Then they walked to the store's entrance and roughly went outside.
Dad, what should we do about the money?
Well, they left, so let's just let it go. I hope customers like that will never come again. I witnessed rough customers for the first time and my heart was pounding with tension. But my father responded as if it was nothing and quickly moved on. And he had a smile on his face, saying that today was fun. If my father said so, I took a deep breath to calm myself down and started preparing to close the store for the day. The next day. The store was thriving again today. Many customers who couldn't come yesterday showed up. Also, people who came yesterday and liked the taste came again, and my father and I were very happy. My father seemed to remember the customers' faces quickly and actively talked to those who came yesterday. In the midst of this, those two men appeared in the store again. My father and I were on guard, and after taking their orders, we responded plainly. The two talked loudly without caring, acting as if nothing had happened yesterday. Seeing such an attitude, I felt somewhat unconvinced. And when the flow of customers had settled down, the two approached me with a malicious grin. "I thought so yesterday too, but you're pretty. What's your name?" I said. "Nancy." "Oh, nice to meet you, Nancy. Hey, let's hang out after this." "Oh, I'm Anthony. Remember that. I'm a regular here, you know." I involuntarily widened my eyes. I felt absolutely disgusted and didn't even want to have a conversation, so I immediately refused, but the two still persistently pestered me. Troubled, I glanced at the kitchen where my father was, but he didn't notice what was happening to me in the dining area. Thinking I had to deal with it myself, I involuntarily tensed up. "Hey, of course you'll hang out with us, right? Do you know what happens if you go against us?" "I'm sorry. I'll have to decline. I'm at work right now. Now, if you'll excuse me." As I said that and was about to move my feet to leave immediately, the man who had introduced himself as Anthony earlier grabbed my arm.
Hey, wait. We're still in the middle of talking. Sit down there. Let's talk. There aren't many customers, so it should be fine.
It was the same angry tone as yesterday. I felt I had made a mistake and reflexively pulled my hand away. Then Anthony, seemingly angered by this, raised his voice. Furthermore, he forcibly pulled my arm, trying to make me sit down, so other customers hurriedly told my father that the situation wasn't good. There were also people who stood between me and Anthony to stop him. However, Anthony pushed those customers away too and didn't stop his violent behavior.
Are you looking down on me? I'm a gangster, you know. Want me to teach you what happens if you defy me?
Anthony threatened loudly, and the surrounding customers cowered upon hearing those words. I also shrank back together with the customers. Then my father hurriedly rushed over.
Stop it. If you cause any more trouble, I'll call the police.
My father's calm voice was enough to restore our composure. I immediately stood up and hid behind my father. My father stood in the way with a resolute attitude, and for this moment, he looked really cool. Hearing the word police, Anthony also seemed to falter a little.
You know what'll happen if you do that, right?
He tried to threaten us, but there was more tension in his voice than before. Perhaps sensing that, my father maintained his resolute demeanor and told him,
If you don't like it, just leave already. If you're going to do this to my daughter, don't ever come back.
With just his gaze, my father urged Anthony toward the entrance. Anthony's face turned bright red, and he glared at my father with a very angry look.
I'll let it slide today, but I'll make you regret going against me.
Anthony spat, dropped a nearby customer's plate on the floor, and left the store. After glaring at his retreating figure, my father apologized to the customers and offered complimentary drinks. The customers were frightened, but they seemed to feel reassured by my father's attitude. They left with smiles, saying they would come again. 3 days later, today was the final day of the discount. There were more people than the previous 2 days, making it a day fitting for the final push. We were busy from the morning, and both my father and I had forgotten about the previous day's events. That's when it happened. Even though the flow of customers hadn't died down yet, Anthony came with several people in tow. As soon as my father saw them, he immediately came out of the kitchen and stood in the way at the entrance.
You are banned from entering. I told you I would call the police if you caused any more trouble, didn't I?
Hey. We haven't done anything yet. Today, Anthony had a look on his face as if he was plotting something, and his tone was cheerful. What could he be scheming? Tension ran through me and the other customers. Then Anthony pushed my father aside and started hitting on a group of young women sitting nearby. I hurriedly yelled at him not to bother the other customers. What's this? Jealous, Nancy? I don't dislike strong-willed women. If you want to hang out, you should just say so.
That's not it. You're bothering other people. If you insist that you're a customer, then sit in an empty seat.
As soon as I pointed that out, my father pulled Anthony away from the customers. I really wanted to report him, so I started dialing the phone number. But that ended up being a dud. Because one of the men Anthony brought with him snatched the mobile phone out of my hand.
Stop! Give it back!
I got into a scuffle with the man who yelled at me not to do anything unnecessary, and my father immediately intervened, so I got my mobile phone back, but the man laughed mockingly. Out of the corner of his eye, Anthony spoke to my father. We came to talk today. My father glared at Anthony as if on guard. I went around apologizing to the surrounding customers for causing them trouble. The customers were frightened, and some left money and walked out. Customers outside the store were also peering in with interest at the situation inside. There were even people filming what was happening inside with their mobile phones, and I resented Anthony from the bottom of my heart for ruining my father's dream opening. Do you know whose land this is? Anthony said with a laugh. This is the land of the boss of a big organization that controls this whole area. I don't know how you got your hands on it, but you know what it means to open a store here, right? What do you mean? My father asked, pretending not to know. Then Anthony deepened his smile and said, You don't know anything, do you?
I'm telling you to pay the protection money. What? There's no such thing. We're paying rent, so we don't need that. Who are you?
At that, Anthony laughed as if he had been waiting for this moment and kicked a nearby chair in a victorious manner. When I raised my voice to try to stop him, Anthony shouted the name of his organization at a volume that drowned me out.
Pay up the protection money, boss's orders.
At those words, my father raised his eyebrows. Then his face turned terrifying, and he glared at Anthony and his men. Seeing my father's face like that, Anthony and his men laughed as if they were scared, and spoke in a cocky manner.
It's natural if you're going to do business on the boss's turf, right? We were ordered to collect them. Because you were being too cheeky, we brought our guys along. When Anthony raised his hand, the men around him leaned forward. One man stepped forward and raised his fist. I thought about the impact that would come later and involuntarily held my breath. But my father didn't look away at all and kept staring at the man who had raised his fist. Anthony saw that and let out an amused laugh. You've got guts. We can't have you making a mess in this store. Can't we settle this amicably?
My father asked in a low voice. The atmosphere was such that he wouldn't take no for an answer, but Anthony's voice bounced as if he had been set on fire.
Looks like you've been causing quite a ruckus. But you know, you can't go against the real deal. We can't go easy on you after being disrespected this much.
Anthony's words energized his underlings. I, who had been standing still beside my father, also had my arm grabbed and was taunted with mocking words. Seeing that, my father showed an angry expression. Anthony continued to taunt my father as if provoking him. I'm saying I'll let it slide if you pay up quickly, so just pay obediently.
And to apologize to us, you'll make the ramen free from now on, right?
He slapped my father's shoulder, which didn't budge an inch and also looked at me in a vulgar way. My inner feelings were not calm. I wanted to call the police, but my body was restrained and I couldn't move. The customers had already left, sensing the disturbing atmosphere, and the customers who had remained inside were also driven out by Anthony's underlings. The restaurant might go under on just the third day. My father's dream had finally come true, and I remembered his happy face as he prepared for the opening, feeling a sense of frustration welling up inside me. Looking at my father, his face was stiff with anger like I had never seen before, and he was gritting his back teeth in rage.
That brat and his nerve! Call him here!
My father's angry voice echoed. Anthony shrank back a little at the volume of his voice.
Call him here, you say? You don't mean the boss, do you? Of course. I'll have a good talk with him,
my father said in a low voice. This was the first time I had seen my father's anger so intense. But I thought that if we called the boss, it would only make my position worse, but my father insisted on calling him and wouldn't back down. Seeing my father's stubborn attitude, Anthony shouted,
I won't be held responsible for what happens.
But even so, he still didn't try to call. Unable to endure it, my father ordered me to bring his cell phone from the back. What on earth was he planning to do? That's what I thought, but I was released for a moment and went back to get my father's cell phone as if giving up. The atmosphere between my father and Anthony was on the verge of exploding the whole time. As soon as I returned, my father said, There should be a name that says brother in the phone book on the cell phone. Call that number. Okay. I immediately made the call. When the call connected, I heard the voice of a man who was a little younger than my father. I was a little surprised by his intimidating voice, but as soon as I gave my name, he became very friendly. When I told him that my father was calling for him, he said he would be here in 5 minutes. I called him. Dad, I didn't know you had a younger brother. When I called out to him,
Yeah,
my father answered curtly. This was the first time I had exchanged words with my father's relatives. It was 5 minutes later. Many black cars lined up outside. All the customers had already gone home, and the only ones there were my father, me, and Anthony and his gang. You didn't call him, so I did it for you. You should be grateful.
No way.
That's right.
It's your boss, Donald.
When my father said that, Anthony was stunned.
Boss?
What's going on? Is there some kind of problem? My father's younger brother, Donald, the gang boss, appeared with a puzzled look. Other sturdy-built men accompanied Donald as if to protect him. They clearly had an atmosphere that was hard to call ordinary.
How have you been disciplining this guy named Anthony?
My father's voice, which I had never heard before, echoed in a low tone. The men surrounding Donald seemed to know my father too, as they were breaking out in a cold sweat. Donald glanced sideways at my father's angry face and stood right in front of Anthony. Donald, standing next to my father, was about the same tall height as him and had a similarly good physique. Surrounded by them, Anthony was trembling with his eyes wide open.
Did you tell this guy, Anthony, to collect protection money from me? When I borrowed this land from you, I properly paid the contract and money. Are you telling me to pay even more? You're the one who said you'd rent this place to me. Was it for this purpose?
Consulted by my father, Donald's eyes widened. He was silent, but it was clear he was saying there's no way he would do such a thing. Then Donald shot a sharp glance at Anthony.
I entrusted the house to my younger brother and became independent, but I haven't severed the brotherly bond with him yet. So there's no way my brother would order me to steal money from him. What's this all about?
Anthony listened to the two of them talk and was at a loss for words. Charles, I'm changing the subject, but this man is not one of my subordinates. I've never even seen him before. Hearing those words, my father tilted his head. He introduced himself as such, though.
I heard there's someone who's been doing whatever he wants using my name lately. Maybe it's this guy. Hey, what's the deal?
Donald asked, raising his eyebrows. That gesture was similar to my father's, and although the atmosphere was completely different, I could tell they were genuine brothers. I see.
Looks like you've been running wild as you please. If you're a gangster, there's a fitting punishment for that.
You're prepared for it, right?
Of course, since you were using my name without permission, you wouldn't do that if you weren't prepared, right?
Cornered by my father and Donald, Anthony trembled and sat down powerlessly. He continued to cower and began to apologize profusely.
I'm so sorry. I'm just a punk. I didn't mean to at all. But when I dropped your name, I got underlings and everyone around me started obeying, so I just...
Anthony finally confessed. He probably wanted to leave this place immediately. Anthony's underlings also apologized with all their might, claiming they had been deceived, but their claim didn't hold up. In a cold voice, as if it were a final warning, Donald declared to my father, "Charles, I'll take care of these guys." Hearing those words, Anthony looked up at Donald with trembling lips. Glaring sideways at him, Donald spoke to my father in a bitter tone. "This will never happen again. Let me say it again. How am I supposed to resolve this? Charles, I'm really sorry." Donald apologized without hesitation. His underlings also apologized to my father all at once, a large number of people. I felt unsettled at the unfamiliar sight. My father nodded in an accustomed manner and told Donald to stop apologizing.
I'm not a gangster, so I don't need to do anything more, but if you're going to apologize, could you lend me some of your underlings for a while for free? I'm short on workers, and I'd like to borrow hands other than my daughter. Anyone will do, at least at first. Is that enough for you?
It's enough. But I'm asking you to give that guy, Anthony, some strict discipline. Thanks to him, our sales have dropped quite a bit. My father had a smile on his face, but his eyes weren't smiling. Anthony looked like he was about to faint. He must be imagining the misfortune that will befall him from now on and despairing. As if to add insult to injury, my father said in a low voice,
The ramen shop was my dream. But now that this has happened, I'm terribly sad.
I know how passionate you are. So rest assured, I'll personally punish him. My father and Donald shook hands firmly. I was just watching my father and the others exchange from the side, but I felt very refreshed that they had somehow come to an agreement. In the midst of this, Anthony abandoned his companions to run away to save himself and ran toward the entrance, pushing those around him aside. But Donald's underlings blocked his way, and he was thrown back into the store. With nowhere to run, Anthony turned around and vigorously grabbed my shoulders as I stood there stunned.
Please! You're his daughter, right? Say something to him for me. I'm going to have a terrible time. There's a chance I might even lose my life. Please! Save me! You're the only one I can rely on here. I'll apologize for everything up until now, so please do something.
Hearing Anthony plead with such intensity, I involuntarily shrank back. But I pulled myself together and shook off his hand with a resolute attitude.
I think it was bound to come to this eventually. Also, I'll be charging you for the cost of the dishes you broke.
Hearing my words, Anthony hung his head powerlessly. When I declared that I would charge him including the cost of the food and drink, Donald burst out laughing.
She's a strong girl. As expected of Charles's child.
Hearing those words, My father had a slightly proud look on his face. A few days later, I saw an injured Anthony at the hospital my mother goes to. I inadvertently let out a sound and he noticed me too. I braced myself in case he might do something, but contrary to my feelings, when Anthony saw me, he started sweating profusely like a waterfall and cowering in fear.
Please let me go!
He apologized over and over. I stared at him in amazement, and the nurses who came running hurriedly separated me and Anthony. My mother, who had returned from the examination room, noticed the situation and came running, worrying about my safety. But since I knew the circumstances of how he ended up like that, I couldn't help but smile wryly. Actually, my mother doesn't know what happened that day. My father seems to have told my mother about his family home in detail, but he's keeping quiet about what happened at the store. The reason is my mother's tendency to worry. My mother has collapsed several times from worrying too much, so my father was probably worried about her health. Also, from what I heard from my father, it seems that as soon as Anthony's injuries heal, he'll be sent to work somewhere overseas. The money I demanded was paid in advance by Donald, and he said he'd introduce him to a job to pay back the borrowed money and that he'd never be able to return. While thinking it must be a terrifying place, I felt truly relieved that he wouldn't be able to do bad things again. After that, my father and I continue to run the ramen shop as usual. Donald's subordinates are also working energetically, and my father gives them their salary. Donald said he didn't need to do that, but since they're working cheerfully out of goodwill, my father probably can't help it. I agreed with my father. Even I receive some money under the guise of an allowance, so it's too much to not pay them. My father's store went through a lot, but gradually, customers started coming back. It's probably because my father's ramen was delicious. I also want to become a chef on par with my father and eventually aim to be the best in the world with ramen. I'm so into ramen now that I have such a dream. There's no seat for a middle-aged woman here. Go home. I attended the company party with my mother, Jane. We were having a good time, but then a rude employee named Betty hurled this insult at Jane. To make matters worse, her mother Kate was also acting arrogant. I felt intense anger rising within me, but before I could say anything, Jane spoke up.
Betty, could you please call the highest-ranking person in this branch office?
This single sentence triggered the collapse of Betty and her mother's standing. My name is Maria. A 48-year-old company employee. My father passed away 11 years ago, but my mother Jane is full of energy and runs a flower shop. It wasn't always a flower shop, though. She used to be a hard-working company employee. Even after retiring, the company wanted her to stay in some capacity, but she said, "It's not good for seniors to stay in the workplace forever. I want to take it easy now." So she retired. Then, wanting to work with the flowers she loved so much, she opened a flower shop. Ever since her days as a company employee, she would heal her heart by looking at flowers during tough times.
Flowers don't talk, and that's what's good about them. They don't say unnecessary things, but they're beautiful. Just looking at them calms my heart, she would say.
She often decorated our home with flowers and kept flowers on her desk at work. She seems to be enjoying every day now that she has her own shop. On my days off, I sometimes help out at Jane's store. It naturally gives us a chance to spend time together as mother and daughter, which is a great opportunity to communicate. Hearing all this, you might think everything sounds happy, but I'm actually troubled by someone at work. Her name is Betty. She works in the same branch office as me, in the same department. She's a young employee, currently 24 years old. Young people are supposed to bring energy to an organization, but Betty is the exact opposite. She causes trouble for various people and disrupts the workplace. For example, in her first year with the company, she was supposed to accompany me to a client's office for a business meeting. I had other work to do, so I arranged to meet directly at the client's office, but Betty never showed up even when the meeting was supposed to start. I tried calling her work smartphone, but couldn't get through at all, so I apologized to the client and started the meeting. Just when we were about to wrap up the meeting successfully.
Sorry. I'm late.
Betty showed up with a flippant attitude. On top of that, she was holding an ice cream cone in her hand and started licking it. Needless to say, the male employee from the client company had an incredulous look on his face.
Not only are you late, but what's with that attitude?
Even though he was angry, Betty remained unfazed.
Why are you so mad? I was in line to buy the smartphone I wanted. That's why I'm late, that's all.
Of course, there's no way the client would be satisfied with that explanation.
Are you looking down on us?
It only made him angrier. Anyone else would normally apologize, but Betty isn't normal. Wow, he's super pissed. Maybe he's curious about this ice cream? I bought it from a trendy shop that everyone's talking about. I'm definitely not giving it to you. She said something that provoked the client even more, making him even angrier.
I'm terribly sorry. Betty, go home now.
I gave that order.
I came here to work, but this is just a waste of a trip.
And kicked out Betty, who was whining. Afterwards, I desperately apologized to the client and somehow managed to conclude the business deal successfully. Even now, when I think about that time, I can't help but sigh. I never want to go through that again, but Betty doesn't consider other people's feelings. She's caused the same level of trouble multiple times, to the point where we've made it a rule not to let her interact with clients. You'd think someone like this would be fired, but Betty has a powerful ally, which is why she can't be disciplined. That ally is her mother, Kate. Kate is a department head at the head office, and she's had a strong voice within the company since joining due to her significant achievements. Naturally, no one at the branch office can go against her. Even Bob, the branch manager, can't speak up strongly against Kate. Betty takes advantage of this, and whenever something happens,
I'll tell Mom on you.
She makes a fuss, saying. It's also troubling that Kate frequently comes to the office under the pretext of inspections. Betty mainly holds others back, so her work performance is quite poor. I wish her mother and boss, Kate, would scold her properly, but for some reason, it's always the employees around her who get yelled at instead.
Betty worked so hard to get into college. If she's not thriving, it must be because of the bad environment around her.
Kate says that loudly, but she didn't study much as a child and failed her college entrance exams. It seems she studied to take the exams again, but she couldn't focus on studying at all and was unemployed until she was 22. Then she got hired through Kate's connections and became a troublemaker. How do I know all this even though I'm not family? Because Betty blabbed about it herself. At the new employee welcome party, Betty called herself a hard worker.
I studied for an hour every day since I was a kid. Sometimes you need a break, so I took 4 days off a week though.
Betty said that with full confidence, but I think anyone can clear an hour of study a day just by doing homework from school. An employee who went to a college prep school said it was normal to study for 8 hours a day on days off to pass the exams. Betty's amount of studying can't be called hard work.
I failed the college entrance exams in my senior year of high school, but I realized life isn't just about studying, so I did various things to broaden my horizons.
The words themselves are good, but Betty said she'd attend a voice acting vocational school and quit after 2 months, said she'd go to a programming vocational school and dropped out after a month, repeating the pattern of giving up right after starting something. Because of that, time just passed and she ended up not learning anything. But the troublesome part is that Betty feels like she's accomplished something with this. Soon after joining the company,
I attended a computer vocational school, so even difficult tasks are easy.
she used a computer, saying. But what Betty was doing was just using a spreadsheet to calculate sums and averages. It's something anyone in the company can do easily, not something to brag about every time. She makes a simple document.
I did it!
And feels like she's done an amazing job, saying. Even if I want to ask her to do the next task, she won't budge, maybe because she's tired. Right now, making 3 documents a day is her limit, so her work performance is at the bottom. She really fits the term useless employee perfectly. But Betty's outrageous behavior doesn't end there. When I was helping out at Jane's flower shop on my day off, Betty and Kate showed up together. I had a bad feeling something was about to happen.
Welcome!
But for the time being, I greeted them with a smile, saying. Betty made a face as soon as she saw me.
Why are you here? I came to find flowers to decorate my house, but this is the worst.
Oh, you're the employee who ruins Betty's hard work. Get out of here now. Even Kate suddenly hurled abuse at me, so I was fed up, but since they're important customers, I decided to treat them politely.
This is my mom's shop, and I help out on my days off.
I explained that, but the next moment, Betty kicked over a bucket of flowers. Kate followed suit and slammed a potted plant on the floor. That plant wasn't merchandise, but a flower that Jane had been carefully growing.
Why would you do this?
I hurriedly set the bucket upright and rushed to the planter, but the floor was soaking wet, and the planter was beyond repair. Then Betty snickered nastily.
A store run by a nuisance should just go out of business. I just helped bring it closer to closing down.
That's right.
I sense Betty's will, so I did something a bit rough.
After that, this troublesome mother-daughter pair said to each other.
I sympathized. Mom and I have great power together.
But it's no joke. Moreover, Jane, who had finished delivering flowers, came back to the store and was stunned by the state of the shop.
We wrecked the middle-aged woman's store for you. Let's go, Mom. Yes, Betty. I don't want flowers from a store like this, so let's go somewhere else. Bye, middle-aged woman.
The two spat out hateful words and quickly left the store, but Jane and I were left to clean up the mess. While doing so, I explained what had happened, and Jane looked very sad. It's only natural since the flowers she had cherished were damaged.
Those people. If they do something again, we'll need to take countermeasures.
I thought what Jane said was obvious, so I agreed. For the time being, we decided to install security cameras, but unexpectedly, we had a rematch with Betty and Kate. One day, I attended a company party held at the head office. This party gathered not only head office employees, but also employees from all the branch offices. It's quite a grand event, with over 1,000 people attending in total. Only employees are allowed to participate, but I was permitted to go with my mom. The party started around the time I arrived 2 hours before the opening time and finished various preparations. At this party, the president of the head office splurges and provides quite delicious food. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet style, so there's nothing more appreciated than this. Jane may be getting older, but she still has a hearty appetite and loves meat.
It's delicious,
she says while eating roast beef. I'm also very happy to see her joyful face. However, people who ruin this mother-daughter time make an appearance. Needless to say, it's Betty and Kate.
Poor people are rejoicing over cheap meat.
You shouldn't end up like that, Betty. Hearing such horrible things, Jane and I had our moods ruined. We wished they would go away quickly, but they didn't care at all.
Only employees are allowed to come to this party, right?
So what are you doing here? Kate voiced that question.
There's no seat for a middle-aged woman. Go home.
And Betty even declared. Furthermore, with a swift motion, she snatched Jane's plate and slammed it on the floor. I threw away the cheap meat for you.
It must be a feast for poor people. Oh, I'm so glad Betty has grown up to be such a kind girl.
Betty and Kate snickered nastily while the staff hurried to clean up. With that, I finally reached my limit of patience. Whether she's a boss or her daughter, I'll get seriously angry at them. And I'll make them apologize to my mom. I was about to unleash those feelings of anger, but before that, my mom spoke up.
Betty, could you call the highest-ranking person in your branch office for me?
Those words triggered the collapse of Betty and Kate's standing in an instant. There's no way Betty would obediently listen to what Jane says. Calling for a higher-up, what a complainer.
It's uncool for a senior to say that, so you should stop. Really, it's just as she says. You have common sense despite being young, how admirable.
With Kate's encouragement, Betty grew even more confident in her own righteousness. Get lost, you complainer. She barked, her attitude becoming increasingly overbearing. But Jane refused to back down.
Instead of spouting nonsense, go and fetch the branch manager right now.
She demanded in a firm tone, not giving an inch. Jane exuded an overwhelming presence, creating an atmosphere that made it clear defiance would not be tolerated. Even the brazen Betty seemed to sense this. Huh? Why are you so angry? She asked.
Well then, I'll go call them. The branch manager can't go against me, you know.
With her thick-skinned personality, Kate made this provocative remark before going to summon the branch manager. 5 minutes later, the branch manager, Bob, appeared on the scene. He was trembling and breaking out in a cold sweat, having heard that his subordinates had caused trouble.
I was told that they did something rude. Actually.
As Jane explained the situation, Bob's face turned pale and he apologized profusely.
I am truly sorry. It's unacceptable for them to treat you with such disrespect, Jane.
What?
Why are you apologizing so much? You're the branch manager, so you should be taking my side as your employee.
Incredibly, Betty yelled at Bob. It was unthinkable for a regular employee like her to take such an insolent attitude towards her superior. While Betty's personality was clearly warped, having Kate by her side likely emboldened her to act so arrogantly. Even so, this situation was bizarre. Jane, too, seemed to notice the abnormality and furrowed her brow.
I occasionally hear about the workplace from Maria, but Betty is even worse than I imagined. Huh? Don't butt in, you middle-aged hag. You want me to smash that cup of yours too?
As Betty grew even more carried away, Bob's face turned visibly paler by the second.
That's enough. Jane is a distinguished contributor who helped establish our branch office. What? What's that supposed to mean?
Unable to follow the conversation, Betty stared in shock.
This person was able to establish this branch office? That's why I'm telling you to stop with that rude attitude.
Bob interjected, cutting Betty off and beginning to explain.
Our company used to be a small office in a single room of a building. But when Jane joined us, our performance skyrocketed. She worked tirelessly as the first branch manager when we were setting up this branch. What? She was that good?
Betty looked at Jane in surprise. The expression on her face was so crestfallen that I almost burst out laughing.
That was over 40 years ago. She's retired now and runs a flower shop. She doesn't have much to do with the company anymore. But in recognition of her incredible contributions, we send her an invitation to our social gatherings every year. She hasn't been able to attend for the past few years due to various circumstances, but she made it this year. And yet, we've caused this commotion.
Even the usually calm Bob glared at Betty in this moment. After all, he was an adult with a fair amount of experience under his belt. When he got seriously angry, he could be quite intimidating.
I'm the daughter of the section manager. Do you think it's okay to take that attitude with me?
Betty retorted, though she was clearly frightened. But it seemed that excuse wouldn't work anymore.
Leave me out of this. Hurry up and apologize.
Kate, Betty's last lifeline, had become completely cowed and started saying things like this.
Jane is a legendary employee that even the higher-ups at headquarters are considerate of. And when you've been rude to someone, apologizing is the basic thing to do as a human being. Mom, you were making a fuss with me just a moment ago. What was that about?
Betty was shaken to see Kate's sudden about-face. Both Jane and I were stunned by the drastic change in attitude, but Kate approached Jane with an awkward smile.
You're Jane, right? I saw you at a social gathering a few years ago, but your aura is different. It's like you're a different person. Are you trying to say I've gotten old? Well, excuse me for that.
Jane's mood soured completely upon hearing Kate's excuse.
Stop saying stupid things and hurry up and apologize. When you've been rude to someone, apologizing is the basic thing to do as a human being, right?
You're right. I'm terribly sorry. Kate apologized, but Betty didn't seem satisfied with this turn of events.
Mom, aren't you apologizing too easily? I don't care if she's some legendary employee or whatever, she's already retired, right?
It was an extremely rude remark, but I had my doubts as well.
Did something happen between you and my mom in the past? You seem to be afraid of her. What? No, that's not.
Kate tried to make excuses, but it seemed that Jane had noticed something.
Could it be that you're the employee who broke the flower vase? What? I don't know anything about a pink flower vase.
Seeing Kate's reaction, I was convinced that Jane was right.
How do you know the color of the vase? Jane never mentioned anything about the color. Huh? Well, I just had a feeling that Jane might like the color pink, so I kind of assumed.
Kate tried to brush it off with a flimsy excuse, but of course, it wasn't going to work.
This habit of making excuses definitely proves that you're the culprit behind the flower vase incident,
Jane declared, and began to recount the story.
It was back when I was still working at this company. A young Kate got completely drunk at a party. It was my birthday party, but she was yelling things like, "Who cares about the birthday girl, Jane?" She even broke the pink flower vase I had received as a birthday present. How awful! That's not how a working adult should behave,
I remarked, looking at Kate with a disgusted expression. Jane also let out a sigh.
That day, Kate was in no condition to hold a conversation, so we just sent her home for the time being. The next day, she came to apologize, which was good, but she kept making one excuse after another, which only made me angrier. I am truly sorry for what happened back then. You scolded me so harshly, Jane, that I even had nightmares about it for a while.
To think that she would forget about Jane even after going through such a frightening experience. I must have had a look of utter disbelief on my face. Perhaps sensing my gaze.
I compensated for the flower vase, so let's just drop this story.
Kate awkwardly tried to change the subject.
Mom, you're so uncool. I can't believe you're the type of person who changes their stance so easily,
Betty muttered, prompting Kate to glare at her.
I've been covering for you all this time, and this is what you say? Huh? Isn't that what parents are supposed to do? Their children are the most precious to them, so it's only natural to go that far for them,"
Betty retorted with a brazen opinion. No matter how lacking in common sense Betty may be, I thought she at least had some affection for her mother. After all, Kate had been covering for her so much on a daily basis, and they seemed to get along well. I had imagined that Betty would have some sense of gratitude, but it seems she's the type to go beyond that. In a bad way, of course. As I looked on in disbelief, Kate finally lost her temper for real.
"Is that what you've been thinking all this time? I never thought you were such a heartless child. That's why I'm saying it's only natural for a parent to do that much. I can't muster up any compassion or thoughtfulness, you know? Think about all the hardships I've been through. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to raise you?"
It was true that Betty was a selfish person who still couldn't stand on her own 2 feet without relying on her parents. Anyone would find it unbearable to be with someone like this for years on end.
"You're not good at studying or sports, and you're always causing trouble at school. Have you ever considered how embarrassed and ashamed I've felt all this time?"
Kate continued, showing no signs of calming down. Her fury was unrelenting as she went on. "Even after you graduated high school, I spent so much money sending you to all sorts of places, but you couldn't stick with anything. I had no choice but to get you a job through connections. You better pay back all the money I've spent on you." Finally, even Betty's face turned red with rage as Kate started saying these things.
"Shut up. If you're going to say that, then I won't rely on you anymore. I can live just fine on my own," Betty shouted back. "Fine. Then get out of this house."
They ended up saying these harsh words to each other before storming off in different directions. Bob promised to make sure they properly apologized and faced consequences later, but Jane and I were utterly exasperated with both Betty and Kate. Afterwards, on Bob's orders, they both were kicked out of the venue, so we were somehow able to enjoy the rest of the social gathering. But honestly, I never wanted to spend time with those two again. 1 week later, Jane and I visited a certain branch office. This place was known for being strict about work, and we had come to meet a particular person. However, while being led to the meeting, we heard a scream. The next moment, one of the doors burst open and Betty came flying out, hiding behind me.
"I can't take it anymore. Stop that guy."
Betty pointed in the direction she had come from. Then, a large man over 6 feet tall emerged, and I recognized him.
"Joe?"
This was Joe, an employee who worked as a section manager at this branch. He had previously worked with me at my branch office and was someone I had gotten along well with, a motivated individual who brought energy to the department and was always considerate of others.
"Well, if it isn't Maria and Jane. Thank you for taking the time to come all this way. I apologize for letting you see such an unsightly scene," Joe said. "What happened?" "Betty came running over here."
At that, Joe was scary. Betty burst into tears, wailing. However, Joe wasn't the type to corner someone without reason. I figured Betty must have done something, so I decided to go into the room and hear the full story. By the way, Betty was transferred to this branch office the day after the social gathering. This was where problematic employees were sent, and Betty had also come here for re-education.
"Telling me to move all of a sudden is seriously annoying,"
Betty complained, but since she had been given special treatment until now, I wished she wouldn't complain too much. In reality, she should have been sent here much earlier, but it was only after Kate left that they were finally able to transfer her. The plan was for her to settle down after a week and then properly apologize to Jane and me. However, when we arrived, we stumbled upon this commotion.
"Actually, I told her to create documents on the computer and make copies, but she snuck out on her own and went to the nearby convenience store. When I lectured her about it, she started crying, ran away, and sought help from Maria. That's how it unfolded, Joe explained, shaking his head in exasperation. No matter how you look at it, you are wrong. I sighed, prompting Betty to cry even harder. My salary has been cut, and I have no motivation at all. Plus, this place is in the middle of nowhere. There's nowhere to go for fun. This is unbelievable. You're in no position to complain. You should be grateful they're still employing you when they could have fired you ages ago. Joe scolded her, his patience wearing thin. At that, I quit. I can't do this anymore, Betty declared. As a company, we don't mind if you quit since you're not being useful anyway. I blurted out my true feelings, and Joe nodded in agreement. Sorry, but that's exactly right. This is where employees who have nowhere else to go if they don't work hard are sent. If you say you can't put in the effort here, then you're better off quitting since there's nowhere else for you. That's horrible. It's troubling if you try to stop me, but being told so clearly that I'm unwanted still hurts in its own way, Betty said, showing a complicated expression, but it was just annoying. Stop blabbering and choose whether you're going to quit or work hard, Jane snapped, unable to take it anymore. Betty's face contorted as she muttered, I'll quit. And it was decided that she would really leave the company. If even Joe, who was known as the Rehabilitation Factory, was giving up on her, then quitting seemed like the best choice. Before you go, make sure to properly apologize for what happened at the social gathering, Joe prompted Betty. I'm very sorry. She apologized reluctantly. Realizing we couldn't expect anything more from her, Jane and I decided to end things there. We went back home, agreeing with each other that they were truly good-for-nothing mother and daughter. About 10 days later, while Jane and I were handling the work at the flower shop by ourselves, two people wearing hats suddenly entered the store. Hand over the money! You're not allowed to resist! Even though they were disguising their voices, I could tell they were both women. Jane and I were startled by the sudden intrusion, but I managed to say, This store has security cameras, you know. We'll be calling the police. At that, they started to panic. Huh? Wait a second. Is that true? Isn't calling the police against the rules? Hearing their voices, I immediately realized who they were. It's Betty and Kate, isn't it? Your voices have gone back to normal. The moment they heard my words, the two figures, who were likely Betty and Kate, became even more flustered, so I was probably right. This can't be happening. What should I do? Mom. Hey, don't call me Mom. They'll figure it out. The woman who seemed to be Kate scolded the one who looked like Betty, but that pretty much confirmed it. Do you want money? Or is this just a prank? When I asked that, I mean, sure, I want money, but just making you uncomfortable is enough for me, Betty responded. But you should at least hand over like $100. It's called manners. Kate was spouting nonsense, but I retorted, I don't want to give even a cent to people who barge in like this. As I was engaging in this idiotic conversation, I called the cops from the employee-only area phone. The police station is close by, so they should be here soon. Jane appeared. Oh my God! We gotta run! As Maria and I opened the entrance door in unison, we were greeted by a crowd of 6 pedestrians gathered outside. This was a fairly busy area, and it was only natural for passers-by to become suspicious if we were fiddling around while wearing hats. Hey, you're criminals, aren't you? Don't try to run away. We'll catch you.
Two energetic young men barged into the store and attempted to apprehend them.
Mom! Help us!
Betty and Kate resisted, but with more pedestrians arriving, they were easily caught. When the police arrived and swiftly put them into the patrol car, it was clear how foolish they had been. Reportedly, the two girls told the police the same motive for the crime as they had shared with me. After being fired from our company, Betty apparently ended up crying to Kate for help. Kate, too, had made a huge blunder at a company gathering of 1,000 people, leading to her demotion and loss of place in the company, ultimately resulting in her voluntary resignation. Unsure of what to do next, she had been holed up at home ever since. The company lamented that they wanted to make her apologize but couldn't get in touch, as she had been ignoring all communication during her period of seclusion. In any case, the two girls, having lost their place, reconciled and decided to stick together. However, they harbored a grudge against the mother and daughter at the flower shop, blaming them for their situation, and committed this foolish crime. We just wanted some money and thought we'd threaten them a bit before leaving right away. We ended up staying longer than we imagined, and things turned out like this. We are truly sorry. Betty and Kate came to the store a few days later to apologize. As there was no harm done and they showed remorse, they got away with a stern warning, but we couldn't help but feel disgusted by them.
This happened because of your own actions. Don't blame others and run away from responsibility. Stop interfering with Maria's life. You're no longer welcome in our store.
Upon hearing our words,
We are very sorry.
they responded in unison.
Maria works at the same company as me, but she hid the fact that she's my daughter and passed the entrance exam on her own merit. Even after joining, she's been working hard without relying on me. Betty and Kate, it's high time you left her alone,
Jane said in a stern tone.
Betty and Kate, you're too selfish. From now on, learn to be independent without blaming others. Otherwise, you'll always be stuck like this.
Yes. They both replied, hanging their heads, and trudged away. Finally, peace had returned to Jane and me. 2 months later, as I was walking near the park, I caught sight of Betty and Kate arguing loudly.
You're not my mom. Just go wherever you want. Fine, I will. But I bet you can't survive on your own anyway.
They were yelling at each other in such an ugly way.
You're practically living like a homeless person. Why don't you have any money? When we were living a normal life, you used to buy and use brand name products all the time. That was my reward for myself. I spent it all on your education.
From their mention of not having money, it seemed like they were fighting over financial issues. Just when I thought they were being a nuisance in a public place.
Shut up!
A group of 3 delinquent-looking guys shouted at them. We're sorry. They ran away with pitiful voices, but the guys didn't let them off and chased after them.
Hey, don't run away. The younger one is pretty cute. I want to make her my girlfriend.
One of the guys said this, so who knows what would happen if they didn't manage to escape. But if I clumsily tried to help that mother and daughter, it was obvious they would demand money from me. I immediately left the park and returned home. Meanwhile, I'm still working as a company employee. Recently, my past achievements have been recognized and I was promoted to section manager. Although I'm just a branch section manager, my salary has increased compared to before. With Betty and Kate gone, it's become much easier to work and everything is great. Bob also said he wouldn't give special treatment to certain employees, and he's been properly following the company rules. Now that the problematic people are gone, he himself has a brighter expression too. Jane is also running a flower shop and looks happy as always, surrounded by flowers.
This flower is about to bloom soon. I'm sure it will be beautiful.
Seeing her heart dancing like that makes me feel joy too. It's just an ordinary scene, but I'm living each day hoping this happiness will continue for as long as possible.